move the conversation now to Japan, China, India, and then we'll also talk about commodities and currencies. You mentioned in a previous answer that you thought that the Japan economy was doing better than its GDP numbers seem to indicate, though there are some people who believe that the effects of Abenomics are wearing off.
Well, I think some of the effects really have not gotten started too much yet. Certainly, the first two parts of the three arrows that Prime Minister Abe was talking about have been implemented, but a lot of the changes within Japan regulations have been slow to come about. But I think they're gradually showing some impact. They're showing some impact, I believe, in the stock market as people, investors are now thinking that companies there are more inclined to pursue profits and shareholder value. I mentioned the GDP figures, of course, show that Japan is, at least was in for 2 quarters, another technical recession, which I think would be the second in just 2 or 3 years. But I think the Japanese economy is better than that. I think household spending is somewhat resilient. We have a very strong labor market. In fact, if you look at, I believe there are 1.23 job offers for every job applicant. We saw a balance of trade current account surplus here in Japan just in the last day or two, which is a positive thing. We're seeing wages beginning to rise, and we're also seeing that maybe inflation, the deflation that has gripped Japan is maybe fading just a little bit.
I want to talk about China. Today we've had the PBOC announce that it has lowered interest rates on loans that it makes to banks. In the last 12 months, we've seen the PBOC reduce benchmark rates 6 times. In how much trouble do you think China is?
Well, China's growth is slowing, no question about that, and they're coming under structural pressure. I don't think China is ever going to see the 10% growth again that it averaged for 35 years, but I don't think China is in danger of a hard landing really anytime soon. China's growth is slowing, of course, because its labor force will be shrinking because of the one-child policy. Productivity growth is slowing as most of the people have already been moved into factories and other jobs. China is just not as competitive as it was 20 years ago. A lot of the investment in China has been financed by debt, so debt is high in China, which is also slowing growth. And the tremendous investment boom has caused huge excess capacity. So there are lots of reasons why China's growth is slowing. But it's the industrial sector that is really in a recession today. We're seeing decelerations in industrial production and fixed investment. But the consumer side, and China's trying to transition to a more consumer-led economy, that's doing pretty well. We saw Alibaba's single day have a huge amount of sales. There are enormous numbers of cell phones continue to be sold in China. So I think the consumer part of the economy is doing reasonably well. And China's gradual stimulus over the last 18 months or so, I think, is beginning to show some fruit. And that I believe China's economy is in the process of stabilizing, and we're seeing just a little better data out of pieces of it.
But how much worse does it get in China before it gets any better? When do you expect the slowing growth to stem? And are we talking about, let's say, GDP growth in China hitting 3 and 4%?
Oh, I'm guessing it's higher than that. Nobody knows for sure. There's a big lack of confidence in the official numbers. We'd say China's probably growing in the 5% or so range, maybe a little more. But I think China's in the process of stabilizing right now. I don't know that it's going to get any particularly worse than that. If you read or listen to some of the comments, we think the party leadership is now focused on growth again and is intending to get growth to pick up. They've done a lot of different kinds of stimulus because in addition to all of the reserve requirement and interest rate cuts that you mentioned. So we think China is probably stabilizing. Will it increase its growth much from here? I don't think so, but I think the hard landing is way out into the future if there is one, and I don't see that growth is going to particularly slow much from where we are, at least for the next year or so.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm not sure the commodity market is saying that. In fact, today I was reading a report from Goldman Sachs, who has maintained its underweight rating for commodities across the board and has said that pressures in the commodities market will continue. China has been a key contributor to those pressures. Do you believe that commodity prices are now likely to stabilize, or are we going to see more of a downside to them, as Goldman Sachs points out? Or if you believe that the Chinese economy is stabilizing, then prices are going to rebound in the near future?
Well, I think that was the same company that said oil prices were going to $250 when they were like $125. So I do think commodity prices, they'll probably be under a little more pressure over the next 2 or 3 months, but I think they are also in the process of stabilizing. You know, the only cure for low prices is low prices. Low prices send messages to both consumers and producers. They tell producers, don't produce as much, and they tell consumers to, hey, buy more because stuff is cheap. We're seeing miles driven in the United States rise quite a little bit of late because gas prices are cheaper. We actually haven't seen demand growth has slowed, but demand continues to pick up slightly. What's happened to make commodity prices under such pressure is a huge increase in supply based on 8 or 10 years of one record price after another. We're not optimistic that record prices are going to come anytime soon, but we think they're in the process of maybe a little more pressure over the next couple of months, but then stabilize and find a bottom.
How do you view, Dr. Baur, the Indian economy? You visited India several times before. We're now, I think, the fastest growing economy in the world, and yet there are many, many weak spots within the domestic economy. What's your outlook on India?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of potential here in India. Probably your key advantage is in demographics. One of the youngest demographics profiles in the world. You have a very credible central banker. Inflation has come down fairly significantly. There's room for the central bank to cut interest rates. You have a much better fiscal deficit and current account deficit than in the past. You know, I think there's plenty of potential. You have a young aspirational society. You have a large group of people that are very well educated. You know, I think there's great potential here. You have a reformist government. They're trying to put some reforms in place. I think one of the key things that needs to be done is just try to move up more places on the ease of doing business ladder by the World Bank.
Are you not concerned about the lack of a pickup in investment activity in India, about the slowing in consumption in India, and the fact that currently, as government finances go, there is some doubt now that we may exceed the 3.9% fiscal deficit target that we've set out for ourselves? I don't want to sound alarmist, but I'm just pointing out some of the negatives.
Well, certainly, and lack of investment growth has been one of them. I think companies here in India have maybe not seen the opportunities. But if you look at the stock market, for example, I think valuations are a little below average of the last decade or two, but they're below average on probably cycle lows of earnings. So I think the government has been investing in infrastructure. I think their plan will continue to. So certainly there are headwinds, but I think the potential is there for positive moves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baur, for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit here to India.
Thank you very much.